Okay, that leaves us with just one final panel for this evening, and it is in a very secure pair of hands. Some people know him as the CEO of Hong Kong Rugby, but for a certain generation, he will always be the pin-up face of Police Report on Hong Kong television. There is a touch of Hollywood to him, and there always has been. He has been one of the great guardians of sport, not just in this part of the world, but I think anywhere, and the legacy he'll be leaving with Hong Kong China Rugby is an extraordinary one. He also has a wealth of experience at the game as a whole and big events in particular, and that leads him very nicely into curating our final panel for today. Please welcome up television star and Hong Kong China Rugby CEO, Robbie McRobbie.
Thank you, Dan. Just before we start, if those who have managed to get through to this part of the afternoon, if you want to just move a bit closer, make it a bit cozier for our last panel. Come on, Alan, in you come. Okay, so it's my very great pleasure to moderate the final panel of today, and I have got three fantastic guests who will be joining me. So please, let me introduce, first of all, Professor Christine Low. Christine is Chief Development Strategist, Institute for the Environment at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She's a former Under-Secretary for the Environment in the Hong Kong SAR government and former Special Consultant to the Chief Executive Office on the mainland's environmental policies. She's authored many academic and popular works and received many awards. Professor Christine Low. And next up, this man is a seasoned professional with over 15 years of experience in the intersection of sports and sustainability, with a diverse background spanning prestigious events such as the London 2012 Olympic Games and the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games. He has honed his skills in sustainable procurement, sustainability strategy, and stakeholder engagement, and he's currently serving as Senior Sustainability Specialist at Innovation Consulting. Simon Wright-Jones. And last but certainly not least, Mr. James Irvine. Over 20 years, he has developed a broad commercial acumen across the sporting and entertainment landscape. He's built successful partnerships with major brands to deliver strong commercial outcomes across all aspects of programming, ticketing, marketing, and communications for a number of world-leading stadiums and venues. He is the Director Commercial of Kai Tak Sports Park, the incredible Hong Kong infrastructure project due to open by the end of 2024 or possibly early 2025. James Irvine. Okay, so the previous panel, which I thought was absolutely excellent, have basically laid down the challenge, and so we are now going to attempt to answer Melanie's challenge of how do we walk the talk. Simon, we'll start with yourself. The Birmingham Commonwealth Games. Tell us a bit about the sustainability initiatives that you introduced through that, and also, I think critically, who drove those initiatives? Was it the Commonwealth Games organisation? Was it Birmingham City Council? Was it the UK government? Who were the people behind it?
Thanks, Robbie. I think if we address that second issue first, of the driving factors, so I guess with each Commonwealth Games, there's always, you have to do better than the one previously. So the Commonwealth Games Federation puts into place basically a framework that you need to address and you need to look at. As well as that, the UK government then addressed a lot of issues that we were looking at. And I guess in a minor way, the Birmingham City Council. So with that, I guess I'm going to address the whole of the ESG initiatives. So from an environmental point of view, the first thing the Birmingham Commonwealth Games did was partner up with Severn Trent Water, so they were the sustainability partners, really. And with that partnership, they commenced a 2,022 acre, tree forest for the games. So as well as that, they introduced 72 tiny forests. So these forests were one for each of the organizing teams taking part, and then those tiny little forests were then planted in trees, in hospitals, in areas that there was just built up areas. So they did that, where they looked at, from a governance point of view, they put in place the ISO 2012-1, which is sustainable events. So again, that is just a framework of managing your event. And they went a little bit further as well. So the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham were the first to then start to do a proper diligence audit on their suppliers. So we produced a sustainable sourcing code. With that, we had PwC come in-house as auditors, and they went out and audited some of the factories here in Hong Kong, in China, across India, in Turkey, just looking to see what was going on. I think a few games in the past had fallen foul of toys being made or clothing being made not in the right manner. So it was doing that due diligence piece of getting those pieces done. And then from a social point, they introduced it's an organisation called BASIS, so it's the British Association of Sustainability in Sport. So between that and the Commonwealth Games, they introduced a carbon literacy project. So that they managed this training. All the volunteers that were part of the games went through this training. They then took that training out to local colleges and to local workplaces. Since the Commonwealth Games, BASIS now offers that training out to any sporting organisation or anyone who has any interest in it, really. So just to keep on driving that, I get that legacy through. And I've already touched on from the governance part of the ISO 2012-1, that was a really important part for the Commonwealth Games. As a background for that, so the ISO 2012-1 was launched for the London 2012 Olympics, and every Games, be that Olympic or Commonwealth Games since, has achieved that. One of the things we did differently this time was we embedded the 2012-1 management system within the Games, but also we made it so that when the Games finished, it didn't have to go back to scratch. So that management system was passed on to the Commonwealth Games Federation, so they then owned it, and then they can pass it on to wherever the Games may be next.
If they can find a host city,
exactly.
Obviously. So just on the ISO thing then, so was ISO a requirement, or was it just something that you aspired to?
Midway between them both, to be honest. The Commonwealth Games Federation definitely wanted us to have an ISO, but it was down to the organising committee of Birmingham to then decide if they wanted it or not, and they pushed through with it.
So, in a similar vein, Christine, you were very instrumental in the Hong Kong government putting together a green manual for events. To what extent do you feel change needs to be driven by legislation? So, for example, in the Commonwealth Games, insisting that they actually meet ISO?
I'm not sure there was legislation, so to speak. So I just want to say that, big sport, they're usually held in publicly held stadiums around the world. So what that tells you is the government, whether it's the local authority or a national authority, depending on how in that jurisdiction these things are organized, right? The driving factor has to be the local or regional government, some would have to be the national government. But basically, the venue belongs to the public sector, right? So actually, if you're the government, you don't have to pass legislation for everything. Now, in Hong Kong, we follow the British system of law, and if you want money, like we're trying to get round to waste charging here, you do need legislation. However, if you own a venue, like the stadium that we're going to enjoy from next year, you're the government, you can say, I have these rules. This is my venue, this is what I want, and if you want to come and use this space, this is what you have to do, right? So you don't need legislation for everything. So again, government procurement, you don't need legislation. There are many, many other things also that corporates can do, NGOs can do, that if that's what they want, because that's their brand, that's their venue, they can do it. And I just want to say that in Hong Kong, again, we met each other in 2013 because when I was in government at the time, we tried to do a green game. So which one would you choose in Hong Kong? Of course, rugby sevens, because it's the biggest. And we learned a lot. And then you went on year after year to have BEC and other partners to help. And really, that's the way you go. That's what you learn. And over time, you will be able to put a best practice guide together to hand on to others. And before I end, I just want to say that this morning, I think probably all of you were here, you listened to Kenneth Falk talked about the National Sports Association, right? And Robbie, you might have forgotten, but at the time, we thought that if we could get rugby sevens to do it, you could then filter down and get all the other sports to do it. But it did require government cooperation. It did require all these other stakeholders that we talked about in the governance panel. But I think it was too early at that time. But today, I think the mood of the world, the mood of Hong Kong and China have changed. People are much more sustainably minded. And I'd like to see, working with Kenneth and others, to actually start saying, it's such an amazing moment for Hong Kong sport to be moving to the stadium. The stadium has been designed and constructed to be much greener. And, we had all these problems at the SOCON Po, about where to put what, because it wasn't designed that way. So the move to the new stadium, it's going to be a really big moment for Hong Kong sports. And maybe this is the time for various stakeholders, including present company, to really think about how do we do the messaging so that government and others, including the NSA, can really now say, right, in the next, between now and 2030, we're going to have to transform ourselves. So everything that is going to take place in sports at certain venues will have to be green. And then the social dimension, all the things that we talked about in the morning, right? How can you blend that into Hong Kong's narrative? Because the world is changing, you and I know it. But our narrative may not have changed yet, but the people are here.
I certainly can't overemphasize the importance that Christine played when we started our Green Sevens, bringing together the different parties. I often refer to them as the coalition of the vaguely willing, because it really did take Christine's force of nature to actually get us into a situation where we were able to even move the dial slightly.
I just want to make one point. I always say to my colleagues in government, the one thing that government has is convening power. So you have the undersecretary or the secretary, right? Someone in government calling you up and say, please come to a meeting. I'd like to talk to you about, that contract you have with Rugby Sevens. We want to make some changes. They come. And, there's a lot of bitching, right? There was a lot of bitching in the beginning. But when they do it, people are actually quite pleased. So the thing about politicians is, it's a freebie. They don't have to do it themselves. They just have to convene and get people to come and do the right thing.
So I'm going to have one more for you, Christian, on this. So as well as the powers and convening and persuasion, etc., one other very important power that the government has is for major sports events is funding. So as an example, the Hong Kong Sevens is very proudly an M-Mark event. So to what extent do you think that power could be used to actually impose more environmental sustainability measures. So if you want the MMARC funding, this is what you're going to have to do.
I think this is where, today's summit was great, because what you've done is you've connected the social, the governance with the environmental. And actually, if you go through all the things that we've said, if you are the public sector funder, or you're the jockey club, right? People who are supporting, giving money to something, how you want to articulate your goals. I mean, what are the public goals that we want to achieve? And I think if we summarize, the 4 panels, it should be pretty clear what it is that you want. And the government can certainly take that, and government isn't one big thing. I mean, actually, Kenneth talked about how difficult it is to deal with the NSA, and I think we had other speakers who talked about very often government isn't one thing, because there are vested interests or practices, right? Different departments, they're at different places in how they rank priorities. But if you get the top of government and the relevant bureau to actually say, okay, these are now our guidelines, and if you want to apply for funding, we want to see what is your sustainability plan, we want you to articulate what are your social goals. That will make a lot of difference.
So I'm going to stick on the theme of, I guess, so we talked a little bit about carrots, and now we talk a little bit about sticks. James, from a venue perspective, as a venue owner, do you react to the demands of the hirer in this type of area, or do you impose requirements on them?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a huge range of stakeholders that all have to do their bit, which is probably quite a PC answer to the whole thing. But I mean, government has an agenda to be able to set the course of their expectations. It is the government's $30 billion with a B that they're investing in this project, which needs to be hugely commended, by the way, because I mean, I don't think you'd be getting that kind of money in a lot of other places around the world. You certainly wouldn't get it during COVID. You probably wouldn't get it after COVID. So we were fortunate that all that happened when it did. So, that's the government has an expectation, and we talk about the precinct being publicly owned but privately operated. We need to be careful about that with hirers, because as soon as you say government, we want to be flexible and quick. We want to have answers within 24 hours of whether we can do a particular event. And so the less hands involved in that, the better. And of course we'll comply with anything the government wants to do due to the investment and due to who they are. But we need to make these venues work hard. So I talk to people internally. I'm used to venue land, where you do a basketball gig on a Thursday night, you do a community event on a Friday night, you do a arena gig on a Saturday night, and it's back to community mode on Sunday night, and there's a bit of a whoa, But we want the place to work. We want the buildings to sweat. I digressed. But your question was around carrot or stick. In terms of stakeholders, I think it is everyone's responsibility, and I think we're bringing on some big corporates, for example. We want our own initiatives to be able to stand behind, in terms of solar panels, in terms of district cooling system, in terms of 1,000 trees, in terms of 30+% of our site being green, in terms of employing local people, less distance to be able to get to work, permanent and casual. We want to be strong in terms of recycling, in terms of harvesting rainwater, all these things. But those brands will have a story to tell. They won't want to invest in us unless we're being responsible, but they have their own story, and we want to be able to help them tell their story, not BS, not greenwash, but how are you practically helping society to get better, and how are you influencing people that come through our site to do better, because I think sometimes there is a bit of a whatever attitude, but we want to be able to show people the benefit of doing these things with brands, with government, with hirers, to be able to do the right thing. There's going to be we did an independent study, and I always wonder whether to believe this or not, but they reckon up to 3 million people a month will come through our precinct, which is mostly exciting and quite petrifying. But if that's true, we've got a huge opportunity to be able to influence people's behaviour on the importance of their personal behaviour when it comes to the impact on the environment.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the personal impact bit as well.
I think, you know, it's really hard for a commercial organization, right, when you're renting out a venue. I appreciate what you're saying. But let's take those bottles that we've talked about here. I was just in another 5-star hotel, right, 3 times in the course of 1 month, because there are so many events in Hong Kong, and they were serving bottled water shipped from Europe. And I thought that the hotel, if you ask them if they can do that, the answer is probably yes. So the question is, was it the hotel that didn't say, I can do this? Or was it the renter who said, but I don't want that, I want water flown over from Europe, right? So now, of course, in a stadium, it isn't going to be that. You have to think about whatever. But there are difficulties in terms of the relationship between the venue owner and what people want. And then, of course, it's about making money. Let's face it, I mean, we're paying sports stars how many hundreds of millions of dollars? They don't fly. I mean, they're flying from city to city. They don't take the train because they can afford the airplane. So what I'm saying is, there are certain aspects of it, but because the world is also changing, right? Where's the pressure going to come from? It might come from government, it might come from fans, or it might just come from social media. There's all kinds of people that is ragging on you. So what I'm saying is, the world is kind of gradually shifting. It's hard on everyone, and I find it unimaginable to think I'm going to have 3 million people pass through my venue. How am I going to manage, right? I think it's genuinely a challenge, but I hope everybody involved is going to try real hard.
So let's stick on that, Simon, in terms of who's driving change. So your experience with Commonwealth Games, Formula One, more recently, are the moves that those organisations have made in this area driven by a concern or an understanding that you're going to lose customers, you're going to lose market share if you don't feel you're being proactive in sustainability?
Yeah, I think most definitely. So for the Commonwealth Games, there was lots of market research done within the UK, looking at research projects that the Premier League in the UK had done. We looked at projects in the NFL. They did big market research around their fans, around the organisations, to see what are the major factors that are now driving the audience, and especially the younger audience. And sustainability was top and center. It was up the front. It was there. It is the big driving factor for the younger clientele. In terms of Formula One, there's a definite switch. Formula One is trying to attract a new, brighter, younger audience, and the whole essence of Formula One is not very sustainable. So they've had to really up their game in terms of what they do, be that the FIA, so the governing body, Formula One themselves, and with the Liberty Group who own Formula One, and the teams. So they're all putting out how much environmental work that they're doing. I think they've always done a lot on the social side, but have never really spoken about it that much. But definitely on the environmental side, and the younger people have said that unless they up their game, they're not going to go to races. They're not going to go to events. They're just going to not buy the merchandise. So I know in the grand scheme of it, it doesn't mean an awful lot for Formula One, but that trickle effect will then, like you said, will gain attention on social media, and the whole campaign will just kick off. So, yeah, they're really taking a big interest in it.
So that's interesting from the international perspective. But Christine, bringing it back to Hong Kong, now clearly society's embraced this kind of change at different rates, and looking at the ongoing challenges that we're having here with regards to waste charging, is it fair to say that in Hong Kong we're less likely to have our sustainability agenda driven by public demand in comparison to what Simon's just described?
I suspect that if you ask the same flow of people in Hong Kong, there'll be a higher proportion of people who expect you to have done the sustainability, right? I mean, in a sense, we couldn't do certain things in Sokonpo because the venue wasn't designed that way, but we'll be able to do many other things in the new venue. So the question is, if the structure has already done certain basic things for you, then the performer or the company that is actually producing the thing, what is it that they should do, right? And can you be very cool without handing out lots of souvenirs? Or if you have to hand out something, what is it that you hand out that is cool, right? So, I mean, it excites the imagination in a different way. In the past, we might just say, well, let's make some stuff and we'll give it to people. And then you quickly find many people actually don't want the stuff that they're given. Right? I mean, how many events have you been to where people give you a bag of stuff and you didn't really want it? So if people are coming for the experience, they're not coming for the stuff. So what kind of experience are you going to give them? And I think this is where I think Rugby Sevens has really done it. And you and I talked about this in the past. What is it that brings people to Hong Kong year after year? Not only is there great sport, but there is a special community feel. For those of us who live in Hong Kong, and there are actually more and more local people, right, who are coming to Rugby Sevens. So when we move to the big stadium, it will be another moment of truth. How many more people from Hong Kong will we be able to accommodate, right? And I think when people come, they come from that special camaraderie. I mean, my sister, for example, they have created, I mean, I'm talking about this weekend, right? They have created some costume for like 50 people to be able to go to the South Stand. This is something they look forward to. This is what they want to do year after year. Their kids are growing up. The teenagers are now all wanting to do this. There is something there that Hong Kong has created that is really special, that is, the experience. That's why people want to come. So other sports events, other entertainment events, give them that. Don't give them the stuff.
So, picking up on that then, and the point that Jamie referred to before, do you think that in the Hong Kong context, sport can actually be the catalyst for change?
Oh, definitely. I mean, also, when we talked about the Paralympics, because we were able to watch it, right, full time, I thought, wow, what incredible athletes. And now we know they're training with the able-bodied athletes and so on. What I'm saying is, this is a whole realm of really amazing social, sporting stuff that is happening in Hong Kong. And we have champions. So how can we re-articulate all of these things where it becomes something that changes people's mindset about themselves and about the place that we're in? I think this is what we're talking about, right? Why are we saying sports is transformative? In the past, we've always talked about what it did for us because we are performing it. We're part of a team. We learned all of that. But now we're also talking about that transformative part actually has a social part, has a wider part. And we're learning more about what it can help us to do in the wider society. And I think we're moving away from the traditional sense, I mean, people talked about it this morning, of what it may have done for you personally. Now because I also think socially the world is changing. We're more interested in each other, whilst we're also at the same time more interested in individualism. So it's a new kind of individualism in society, and that's why we are interested in what we can do for each other. And we're interested in each other's stories in terms of the struggle. I mean, the person who is a Paralympics has been through a lot to be where he or she is. So I think we want to know that because it makes us feel something about the human condition and about society. So that's why I think if sport were to come much more forward in society to talk about that as part of society and transformation, I think it'll be great. I really, really do. And you're starting with this summit. And what about next year when we're moving to the great place? Will we have another summit? And boy, I think we can triple, quadruple the audience that we have.
That would be fantastic. Well, on that, James, back to Cathay then, I guess a bit on software and hardware. First of all, so you actually, maybe slightly confusing, but you're Cathay Sports Park, but you're also still part of ASM Global, who have got this incredible footprint of venues and arenas around the world. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about the ASM Global Acts Foundation, which is an important part of what you're doing in this sphere, and also the Cathay Sports Initiative, which is a more locally focused foundation which has been operating the last few years. And once you've covered that, any particular initiatives in this area around sustainability that you have seen or you've been aware of from other ASM global venues and arenas around the world? Do you want me to remind you what the...
Yeah. Pass. No, I think we're in a fortunate... The consortium structure, so that's called Cathay Sports Park. Let me know if I'm being boring, politely, but it's Cathay Sports Park Limited, and that's made up of design, build, and operate elements. So you've got architects like Populous, builders like Hip Hing, Arup the engineer, and then these design and build entities will disappear in time when the thing is built, and then that leaves New World and ASM. So you've got New World, this enormous, property, finance, other conglomerate that has a huge sort of sustainability focus around they've got a Vision 2030, so we draw on that in terms of their experience, and we're in constant talks with them about advice on how we shape our operational initiatives. And then secondly is ASM Global. So we've got a program called ASM Global Acts. So the short, hopefully mildly interesting story is that there's 3 pillars to that, which is basically protect the environment, strengthen the communities, invest in people. And so that is the mantra for every one of the 350 venues that we manage around the world. The O2 in London, LA Live in Los Angeles, Coachella, if you haven't been, I was about 20 years too old. I felt about 20 years too old to go, but these incredible sort of 24/7 precincts. So the head office doesn't dictate what you do in those pillars, but they say those are the 3 pillars, and you do what is relevant for you, because what you do in Tokyo is very different to Detroit. I was only talking with one of our colleagues the other day about Cairns Convention Centre. So they've got a very tight relationship with supporting the Great Barrier Reef. Obviously, you can't do that anywhere else but Cairns, So some of it's sort of geographically led. I think I'm getting through your first question. So we're the initiatives that we've got at Cathay, I split into 2 scenarios. One is design initiatives, which is all that stuff that's built in that I mentioned before, and then there's operational initiatives. So, locally employment. How do we get strong sustainability language into our supplier agreements? How do we help marginalised, disadvantaged groups back into the community, because there's health and economic benefits around doing that. So that's what we're walking through from a New World ASM perspective, to combine our knowledge about the Cathay initiatives. And then your third question is around ASM initiatives, and there is Cathay, if you haven't heard of it, fair enough. If you haven't, it's a convention centre in Christchurch, and I was talking with their GM the other day. They are net carbon zero, and so they've gone through this huge process to be able to get there. They've completed their Scope 1 and Scope 2 requirements. They're now putting fair and reasonable pressure on their supply chain to say, hey, you've got to come with us here, or you won't be our supplier in the near future, which is fair. So they've got things like a dehydrator, which takes food waste, shrinks it to 10% of its actual quality, of its quantity, and then it uses that 10% to give to local farms as fertiliser. So apart from the electricity that you're using in the dehydrator, that's net zero. So calculating the carbon emissions from their staff to drive to and from work, and so they're buying credits to be able to offset that, which Chris, I'm sure, would say is cheating, but still, we're getting to zero because they're serious about it. That has a knock-on effect to clients as well in terms of their behaviour. So I think that that's a New Zealand, I think, impressive example. That's more environmental. Then you've got a place like RAC Arena in Perth. They support 6 different charities or causes. So Ronald McDonald House, Lifeline, I'm not near 6, am I? Salvation Army. So every year they do like a raffle, and you buy 2 tickets to the raffle. If you win that raffle, it's called the Golden Tickets, is you get 2 tickets to every event that goes on in that venue throughout the year. So it is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory kind of stuff. So, but that raises hundreds of thousands of bucks for the Salvation Army. So the venue is all about how do we use our venue in terms of giving the space, how do we use our database, how do we use our reach, how do we use our influences to generate money and good for these community partners. So that's sort of environment and community, you know.
I mean, I think the exciting thing that we're hearing and that we've heard all day, and you know, to Christine's point about now is the time. So it seems like we all are very much aligned. We all want to do better together. So, you know, the venue, the event organisers, the athletes, the customers, you know, and there are other organisations and companies who are here today who are also doing some fantastic work in this space. Andrew Chambers, the founder of Tsunami Sport, who have been very much a leader in terms of apparel. Laureus, they didn't mention it, but you know, the Laureus Sport for Good Index is a great example which highlights brands which have made a positive impact through sport. So it just seems like we're all, and when you add government into that mix, you've certainly got all the ingredients for success. I mean, Simon, are there any other particularly exciting initiatives that you've come across?
I guess in terms of indexes, there seems to be quite a few sort of popping up within the sports sector. So SailGP, so they do, obviously they've got their sporting aspect, but they've got an impact league. So they'll measure the teams against the criteria there. There is a sustainable motorsport index, which basically goes onto the web browser to see what's publicly available for every sport, every motorsport circuit, track, even some of the street circuits, to look what's there, and then they'll rank them. As well as that, so the Sport Positive League. So I think the lead from Do mentioned some of the things in the Premier League earlier, but the Premier League, the EFL, so the English Football League, and the Bundesliga, they've been publishing this index since, I think it's 2019. And I guess one of the nice stories from that, so in the first one that was published, so Southampton Football Club, so in the first one, I think they were ranked bottom, or bottom but one or something, and that really shook up the club because it was publicly available, and I think a few of the fans started to write in saying, what's going on with our club? From that, within 2 years, they'd moved up into the top 5 because they'd had the pressure internally, they had the pressure externally, and just by publishing this index, you know, it had really made a drastic impact on the club. So it was a really good movement. But yeah, so these sport indexes are popping up, and they're just making, I guess, the organisations, the franchises, the teams, even the governing bodies more open about what they do. All this is getting publicly published, so it's out there and everyone can see it.
So again, I mean, I think we've been hearing there are lots of very exciting initiatives internationally that we can be drawing on, and you know, Counters In that we heard about today is another, I think, fantastic way of trying to influence personal behaviour change. It seems to me that, you know, again, the examples are out there. So from what Thomas is saying, Singapore's already making moves in this area. So again, to go back to this point, the opening of Cathay, this really is a defining moment in the history of the whole Hong Kong sports industry. So the final question for all three of you, and we'll maybe finish with Christine, but James to start with, how do we ensure that we take this opportunity, the opening of Cathay, we seize it, and we make sustainability a core part of this exciting future for Hong Kong sports industry?
Well, some of it's education, isn't it? We talk with some hirers locally and they say, oh, that sounds interesting, how much is that going to cost? You know, okay, we got to try to get their events bigger and better, and we've got that's none of our brilliance, is the facilities that we've got, to be able to make, hopefully, them sell more merch, sell more sponsorship, sell more tickets, to allow them to grow, to allow more revenue to come in, to allow them to be less reliant on government, handouts, which happens with a lot of NSAs, and that's not a criticism. But then you're getting a bit of resource into the system, into that NSA, to be able to say, okay, now we've got half a person or something who can do sustainability. As opposed, look, please have a chat with me after if you disagree. But if somebody says it's everyone's responsibility and everyone should just put 1% of their time into sustainability, I think it falls flat in its face. Everybody has to do their bit, but you need people to drive it. We're working huge hours, as I know all you guys are, but you need people to drive it from the top in terms of the direction and the importance that is placed on this stuff. Otherwise, people say, I'll just go back to my 99%. So if we can do that in terms of getting, and that extends to, can we get more Hong Kong teams? And that's a content discussion, but it also helps people, Hong Kong can rally around a Hong Kong team that's playing against mainland teams in basketball or in football. And then that gets more money in the system to be able to put into sustainability, because it's not just a very lean resource without the staff to really give sustainability the attention it deserves. So I've actually forgotten your question.
No. I think so. Certainly, one thing that came out of that was so how do we ensure we seize the opportunity? Leadership is critical, absolutely. Simon, what else do we need to have in place to make sure that we seize this opportunity?
I think many people have touched on it already. Christine touched on it. I think Jamie touched on it in the last panel, that Hong Kong has an amazing opportunity now with the new Cathay sort of stadium coming up and running, with all the infrastructure that you've got there, with the rugby union pushing through their sustainability initiatives. I think Hong Kong has an amazing opportunity we've had green games, we've had carbon neutral football matches, cricket matches. Let's get something on the rugby circuit to say, okay, so Hong Kong is the green tournament. So let's drive it forward with the new stadium, with the infrastructure in place, with everyone's here to help basically. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and it just needs to be followed through.
And Christine?
I really think it's about getting the message out there as to who can do what. So we have a venue. I hope we'll have lots of stories about how we should use the venue to maximize the games and the entertainment, because we don't know that yet. So lots more public messaging coming. And as you said, Hong Kong is going to be part of certain international games, like rugby is a really good example. So when the international body is wanting to go green, everybody's got to go green, and rugby sevens already ahead of the curve, right? But there'll be other types of sports coming to Hong Kong where we're part of the international cycle. I'm not entirely sure those who need to hear this message has heard that very clear yet, because you might be seeing it in a silo. Oh, we have a match of something, right? Some game, and they want green, so we'll do that. Rather than be ahead of the curve and say, all these things as part of Hong Kong will have to have some minimum standards. Who that person is to make that decision, I think that person sits in the public sector, right? Okay, that person needs to hear this message. And it isn't this person who's got to do it. This person will have to coordinate and get all the other stakeholders to do it. And then going back, just imagine, right? If we in Hong Kong says by 2030 we'll work closely together. We talked a lot about cooperation earlier on in the day. If we could cooperate to see how to carry all the NSA, right? How to help. Kenneth's point was, how do we help them? Well, what is it that we need to help them? Is it money? I don't think so. A lot of it is how to do it, getting people not to fear. Going to see that in certain venues is already done for you to a greater extent. The data, if you don't measure your own data, somebody's going to measure your data and tell you where you're at, right? So it's better that you measure your own data, to be able to say, look, this really is credible. So I think in Hong Kong, if we give ourselves 5 years to bring sport all along, and we create the narrative, we can start this narrative tomorrow. So SCMP, right? SCMP is a partner. What role can they play? They can play a role. So rugby, you're ahead of the game. Actually, you're right in front. So I hope to see that you'll continue next year. Maybe Rethink will continue in September, right? So what I'm saying is there are all these stakeholders here who agree with doing something and want to do something. So maybe we can all coordinate also a bit better so that messages can be coming out constantly well, you know how it is with the media. You can repeat it 100 times every day, and there are millions of people who wouldn't have heard it. So what I'm saying is repetition is really important, so let's start.
You heard it here first. Let's start talking about it. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give a huge thanks to Professor Christine Lowe, Simon Wright-Jones, and James Irvine.